Welcome to another Third Apron podcast. This is part 3 of Sam's front office rankings. We did part 1 and part 2 going through teams 1 through 20 according to Sam's rankings. And now we're going to do the bottom 10. So let's get right into it, Sam. I
Hang
believe I
on.
don't.
Before we go with teams, I think just because this is the bottom of the list, we should do a little bit of qualifying with like what it means to be a bad front office. When we did this in July, you said something that like we both know is true. I don't know that the listeners are going to know it's true. Like the NBA layman is going to know it's true. When a front office is bad, that does not necessarily mean that everybody who works for the team is stupid. That is, in fact, not at all what that means. Something that you learn when you work in the league is that the average basketball operations employee, whether it's like somebody in scouting or somebody who does the cap work or whatever it is, like somebody who's contributing to basketball decisions for a team, these are the smartest basketball people you will ever meet. 99% of the people who work for the Kings and for the Bulls and for the Pelicans, whatever team it is, like these teams that are at the bottom, they are smarter than we are. Like they are very, very smart basketball people. Where I think bad front offices go wrong, it's at the top, right? It's the owner trusting the wrong person, or the owner being too involved, or somebody having like a level of fame or track record or whatever, getting them into a position of power or influence that they probably don't deserve. Like you hire a famous former player to run your team, and that player's track record and reputation is built on what he did as a player and not as a front office person. Or the owner who was very, very successful in some other walk of life, obviously accumulating the wealth that they have, thinks, oh, because I was really good at this other thing, my basketball instincts are clearly correct. So the things that I think we should do are clearly the right things. It's usually when a team is not well run, it usually comes down to a few people at the top and not the entire organization, which makes this a little bit of a tricky thing to do because like you brought this up when we were talking about some of the worst teams last year. Like there are really smart people working for the Sacramento Kings. There are really smart people working for every team in the NBA. But we're ranking what the front office does as a whole, and the smartest people are not necessarily the people with the decision-making power. I just wanted to make that absolutely clear in case you are one of your favorite teams, like you're a fan of one of the teams that we're going to talk about here today. I would only say of the 10 teams we're going to talk about here today, there are only 3 that I look at and say, you are acting in ways that are truly indefensible, right? Like, I have no idea what you're doing. I don't know what your plan is, all of that. The other teams, it's all like varying degrees of like, maybe they're a little bit behind the curve on this thing, or I disagree with the way they operate in that way. It's a little bit more like different degrees of okay to good. The teams we've talked about, the first episode are the great teams. The teams we talked about in the second episode were the like pretty smart teams. That doesn't mean we're exclusively talking about dumb teams today. Only a couple of dumb teams. Everybody else is at least okay, but there are more smart teams than dumb teams. Do you disagree with anything that I've said? Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I agree. It's the example I think you're alluding to when we did this last year. I was talking about the Suns, where it seems like they have a lot of good people between scouting, analytics, all that stuff. But then there's one common denominator that seems to be steering the Suns into the direction they're in right now. But yeah, that was Sam's PSA. Everyone, don't be mad at him for this conversation we're about to have. Uh, yeah, I think I know which 3 teams you're talking about are, and I suspect they're at the very bottom. Anything else
Yes.
before we get into this?
Ironically, you bring up the Suns. We're going to get to them. They're moving in the right direction. And like that's the other thing. I think the last time we did this, we had several teams that are not at the absolute bottom today that were then, but some important thing has changed. Like I don't think we're at quite the level of bottom tier front office crisis that we maybe were 9 months ago. But yeah, I'm ready to jump in. Number 21, the Orlando Magic, who are pathologically allergic to offense. They might break their streak. They have not had an offense in the top 20 since Dwight Howard was on their team. Now, they might break that streak this year, but they're still below average. So they'd still go since Dwight Howard was on their team without having an above average offense. The Desmond Bane trade is the one that I think most fans, most critics would point to and say, I'm not really crazy about this. I actually think the Desmond Bane trade was mostly okay. He has been what they've expected him to be. They gave up 4 picks and a swap, but one of those picks was to get off of Contavious Caldwell Pope. They're also a young enough team that there's less downside risk for their picks than I think there would be for certain other teams. That being said, any pick 6 years in the future, 5 years in the future, whatever it is going to carry some meaningful amount of downside risk. But I think them giving up their picks is different than, like, say, Phoenix giving up all their picks for Kevin Durant. So I think what they did with Desmond Bane was more paying a premium for a specific player where there weren't other players who fit that archetype, that, like, they needed something so specific and an off-ball shooting guard that also defends pretty well, who could meaningfully boost their offense. There just aren't a lot of guys like that, so they got the only one that was out there. I draw a distinction between paying that premium and, say, doing what the Knicks did with Mikal Bridges, which was just kind of a flat overpay. That being said, they are organizationally far too devoted to the length defense archetype. Their drafting leaves something to be desired. Jet Howard, wasted lottery pick. I think one that you were early on, and I want to give you credit for. We don't talk enough about picking Paolo Banchero over Chet Holmgren. Right now, I think it looks pretty clear that Chet Holmgren should have been the number 1 pick in that draft. Maybe that changes. It's hard to say, but it's not like they made an obvious number 1 pick and that player didn't work out. There was a 3-way debate for that number 1 pick, and it looks right now like they took the second best player, who right now doesn't look like a franchise player. Jamal Mosley's coaching hire, not looking great at the moment. I think a lot of their offensive issues are a result of, let's say, uncreative offensive coaching. They pay their guys so early, just every time. Franz Wagner, July comes, snap your fingers, he gets a max. I maybe would have negotiated on that. Not that I think that's a crazy 25% max. I just think, like, Alperen Şengün is better than him, and Alperen Şengün took less than the max. I would have maybe negotiated that a little bit, or been a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable. Jonathan Isaac, that contract does not look great right now. He has really fallen off. Wendell Carter, I think that contract is okay, just because the center market has boomed as much as it has. But it's not looking great, whereas the last Wendell Carter contract looks like kind of a home run. Am I missing anything here? Oh, the good draft pick that we should get credit for is Anthony Black, looking great. Franz Wagner may be overpaid, but a very good draft pick at number 8. They have done a good job of accumulating talent. Most of the guys they bring in are good. I just don't agree with their philosophy as far as, like, what the team has to be. I think they're a little bit too dedicated to a version of their identity that hasn't really accomplished much.
So this is quite a drop off between maybe last year and even a couple years ago, where it seemed like everybody was celebrating the Magic for putting this team together, crushing their draft picks, and generally having a pretty good cap sheet. And now everyone seems to turn on them for maybe being too high on the players that they selected and paying them these exorbitant contracts. So I want to touch on 2 things that you brought up. And the main thing is, I guess, the overall vision, and their obsession with this archetype of player that you mentioned, where they specifically want guys that have a lot of size and wingspan. And time again, they go after these guys. We see it in their wings, we see it in their guards, even though that's mostly they've worked out recently. They And even like some of their late picks, like getting Tristan da Silva, even this recent draft, like they get Jace Richardson because they just needed that type of player, but then they couldn't help themselves and they bring in Noah Penda, just like fits. Like it's like, okay, you get yours, I get mine. They it's they they get so obsessed with getting these types of players that even though they've been fantastic additions, they don't really, whether it's because of their vision or an inability to construct the roster, then they just don't do the things needed to put together a more modern offense, which is needed. So I think that's why they fell. And obviously, it seems like they're going to run into some apron luxury tax issues over the next few years. Uh, but then when they do try to address some of these issues, it's more so like a half measure. So the Desmond Bain trade, for example, which I think one, they paid a little bit too much, but in the long run, it should be fine. Like, he has been exactly the type of player they needed. He's done everything you could have asked for. He's played every game. You're right about those things, but just bringing him in isn't going to solve their underlying issues. And they need to, they're going to have to do a little more radical changes, shifting pieces around to get the offense at a level they need. I'm not too worried about the defense. I think they just have so much defensive personnel that they'll be able to figure it out. In fact, it could probably be better if they had an elite rim protector, which is so funny that they have length everywhere except at the position that probably matters the most. So that could be some way they address. They'll eventually break up this core a little bit. I suspect it'll probably be Paolo in the future. I would guess the Magic organizationally aren't ready to make that decision for at least another year, especially with all these injuries that they could fall on, with the coaching they could fall on. They'll probably give it a little bit more time, but I would suspect that might be the move, in which case, can you get a big man to address it? But yeah, it's just, we're I think even like from the very beginning, even though when you had these picks, a lot of people could look at the Paolo Franz pairing as, is this something that's really going to work long term, especially once you have to pay these guys and now they're being paid? And yeah, they haven't played that much, but Bain wasn't going to solve Paolo's shot selection or improve his true shooting percentage. I think they have a chance to rise back up more in these rankings if they finally make the decision to break up this core a little bit and try to bring in pieces that can make the offense a little more modern, and how they execute on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason they fell is that we, not even just the two of us, I think the entire basketball world are less confident in Paolo and Franz Wagner as like the core duo moving forward than we were 9 months ago, a year ago, wherever. Like, I think Paolo kind of stagnated, frankly, and I don't know about the fit with Franz Wagner. So much of the defense, too, just kind of comes down to, is Jalen Suggs healthy in a given game? Because when Jalen Suggs is healthy, they defend very, very well. He just is not healthy very often. And that's going to lead to some very difficult questions for them, because right now, Paolo on a 25% max, Bain on a 25% max, Wagner on a 25% max, Suggs not on a max, but on a pretty expensive contract. And then Anthony Black eligible for a rookie extension this offseason. We've talked about this in other episodes. You can't pay all five of those guys and a center and have depth. They're going to have to move somebody. Like you said, I do think it's unlikely that Paolo is the guy that goes at least right away. I think they could get there eventually. I don't think the organization is ready to like make that concession yet. What I wonder is, would they look into trading Suggs this offseason, if only for the sake of having a little bit more consistency to build around? I do think there would be a market. Like, I think he'd be the perfect guy for the Lakers to take a risk on, because they so badly need not just like an average defender, but a like high end perimeter defender. And Suggs can do that and defend multiple positions. I think there would be plenty of interest in Suggs in the trade. I don't know if the value would reflect what we thought he was a couple of years ago, but I think there would be a market for him. And I think it's going to come down to, at least at first, him or Anthony Black, just because you gave up so much for Desmond Bain. You're not ready to give up on him. Franz Wagner is the best player on the team. You're not going to give up on him. And you've wrapped up so much of your identity into Paolo Banchero. I don't think they're going to be ready to give up on him. They might get there eventually. For now, I just don't think that's really on the table. So I think it's going to be a decision of Suggs versus Black in the next maybe year. I think that's something they should address in the offseason, but maybe that drags into the season. I don't know. Center is interesting because they do need a center who can shoot somewhat, right? Like, ideally, you'd want, say, Chet Holmgren, but I think having Wendell Carter Jr. is not quite the shooter that we would have hoped, but is at least something of a threat from three. That's very important for the way they built their team. So we can sit here and say, like, they'd be better off with more of a rim protector at center. But man, the spacing is already problematic enough. So I don't quite know how to address that. They really need to hope that Paolo Banchero starts like making more jumpers. It's kind of that simple.
The answer I thought about a couple years ago was, why didn't they go harder after Isaiah Hartenstein? Because
They were
I
in the
think
mix, weren't they? Or was that
yeah,
when he
but
signed with the Knicks?
he signed with the Thunder instead. They gave him like $30 million a year on a short-term deal,
Oh,
and the
no, they were in
Magic
the mix
had
on both occasions because they
yeah,
were in the
but
mix when he was on the Clippers and he went to the Knicks, but that was at a
but
much lower price. And then again, because they used their cap space on KCP and Hartenstein went to
yes,
the Thunder on the inflated deal.
that's
Yeah.
that's why I suspect they couldn't match on Isaiah Hartenstein, or maybe they'd even feel it's going to be worth that much because they also really wanted to pay KCP, which didn't work out.
And they used their cap space in other ways too. They renegotiated and extended Jonathan Isaac. I think they did another extension. I can't remember which it. I don't think they renegotiated and extended Carter.
They
I think they just extended him.
basically just re-signed a bunch of their players. They did not,
But they used
like
that flexibility. Like that money
they
did make a difference.
they had 50 million in cap space. They signed KCP with like a little under half of it. Used like more a good amount to give Jonathan Isaac that renegotiation, and then everybody else was basically not a new player. They just re-signed a bunch of guys, which I don't know how to. Just something I bring up, like the Magic have had a lot of like a lot of seasons where they had a cap space, and they just for whatever reason they couldn't bring in anybody that could be a difference maker. I don't know if that's maybe they were trying, there wasn't anyone they're really interested in, or they just have like trouble attracting talent. Just something I've noticed, like they've burned a lot of cap space opportunities in the past. But just really quickly on Suggs Black, because I that is going to be an interesting decision. They have some time. Next year, they are going to be managing another luxury tax situation, and they could probably figure it out without trading any of their top 6 guys. If they dump Isaac and Goga, for example, I think they're kind of there. I like the idea of them keeping both Suggs and Black long term, especially with Suggs's injury problems. Like you kind of, it'd be good to have Black, especially if you can get him on a nice contract. I don't know what that is. I'm going to start looking into that over the next month. But with Suggs' declining contract, maybe there's a way that in addition to a potential Paolo trade, then you could subsidize having both guards, in which case you have 2 of the more in-demand types of guards that like 29 other teams would love to have on the roster, and you've got 2 of them. So I think they're going to stretch this as much as possible as far as their top 6 goes. Try to get a little healthier. Like it was pretty obvious that as soon as they did this trade, they put Jamal Mosley on the clock, and I can't say I've seen enough games to really know if coaching is going to make things a lot better. I think it's more so the roster construction. So they'll stretch things out. With under new coaching, I'm kind of expecting, and hopefully some help, that they do reach the expectations they're hoping for. I'm guessing they're going to have like a kind of a pretty busy trade deadline next year instead.
Out of curiosity, what is the highest draft pick in 2026 that you would give up to trade for Paolo Banchero? Like you wouldn't give up 1, 2, or 3. Would you give up 4 for Paolo?
In the 26th draft, you're saying?
In the 26th draft.
I might. I'd have to think about it. I think it also context of the team depends on it. Feels like we're gonna get into Paolo trades in the off season. Seems like, just knowing the way we're already kind of itching about it. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, how the season ends. But I think what the team is a bigger thing. I still need to even figure out who are those teams.
Yeah, I mostly agree. It's interesting though that like 2 years ago we were talking about, or at least I was, and most of the league is like, oh, surefire franchise player. I'll give you credit. You were early on that. You were always kind of dubious. Is that enough on Orlando? You want to go on?
Yeah, let me move on to the next team, Washington, because this is the one team in this episode we're about to do. I would actually have had them in part 2, probably swap them out with the Nuggets, even have them like Wizards, like kind of like mid-tier. And I'll be happy to hear your case for why you put him here. But Talk about one of the greater recoveries in terms of like salary cap management, roster management, to go from entering the second Apron era with this Bradley Beal contract, which I would, I think like when you really think about the worst contracts in NBA history, that's probably the worst contract in NBA history. Being able to get as much value as they did, multiple pick swaps, a bunch of seconds, now having control of the Suns drafts every other year. That helped them get like a pretty nice surplus of picks. They've got 9 first, 12 seconds. So just being able to have the vision and the patience to go through this and then the execution to get out of the contract the way they did, really, like, they were in such a bad position, and they immediately changed their outlook within one off season. I think they've drafted mostly fine. They've been mostly unlucky in the lottery, but like as far as where they get slotted. But I think so far they've drafted. There's two players I think we can say I feel pretty confident in. They will be good starters in Sar and George. Everyone else, there's still time, but I think they should definitely mostly be rotation players, and we'll see what they do with this year's pick. Hopefully, they can get some luck there in the lottery as well. I like the AD and Trae Young trades in a vacuum. They gave up virtually nothing to bring them in. Where I think, and this is where the true test is going to be, we talked about this privately, is are they going to extend them? What kind of extensions would those look like? Because if they give them a contract that just is not really like doesn't really make sense, then that could just mess the whole process up. But they've negotiated really well with the below max guys, like giving Denny Avdia and Corey Kispert these like mid-level-ish contracts that descended, and they're able to trade them later. Jonas Valanciunas, like giving him that contract as well. Like they were able to trade all these guys for positive value later. So that will be the true test. What do they do with AD and Trae? How much do they extend them on? But overall, I think they've had a really strong vision, and have been able, and just the going from where they were to from point A to point, I guess M they are right now, to be able to, I think they're going to be getting into eventually being like I feel confident they're going to be an actual, maybe not a title contender, but like a close to like a conference final contender, just based on their trajectory. So just going from where they were back then to now, I feel like they should be a little higher.
I think you're overplaying where Beal's value was at the time of the trade. It cratered immediately afterward. There was interest from other teams, and now I'll give them credit for negotiating what turned out to be a good trade in light of the no trade clause, because Bradley Beal obviously had the power to kind of kill any deal that he didn't want. That being said, like, he had not fallen off of a cliff yet. I believe he was still an all-star in the last year in Washington. Can you check if I'm right on that?
I'm pretty sure he was last an all-star in 2021. Yeah. 2021 was the last time.
Back, really?
Yeah, and they gave him the contract a year after that. His numbers dropped significantly, and he only played half the year that year, and he just kind of was this like more closer to solid to okay starter than an all-star from that point on.
Oh yeah, I guess he did have. I guess I was wrong about that. So I guess he was not an all-star, but he was still like. We weren't talking about him as a negative contract at the time. I think you might have been, but I think the broader assumption in the league was that he had positive value, and they did ultimately do pretty well in that trade. I would say since then, most of the things that they've done well have been related to the overall vision. Like going in the tank was the right decision. But I think most of the things that have gone right for them have kind of just been like standard tanking team stuff, where like Alex Sarr, good pick. I think he might make an all-star team someday. I am very excited about his future. He was a number 2 pick. Not going to give you too much credit for that, especially since I would rather have Stephon Castle, who went 2 picks later. Keyshawn George is the 1 pick. I think he was 19, where it's like, oh, this is out of the lottery. Good pick. You found a good starter here. Like, good job. The Denny Avdia trade was a train wreck, or at least right now it looks like it. Like, not only did you give up an all-star in his early 20s, You gave up an all-star in his early 20s that you had just signed to the best contract in the NBA. I know it's still a little too early to write off Bub Carrington. I think he'll be like an NBA player, but they didn't get enough upside to justify that trade given where Denny Avdia end up. Bub Carrington is fine, and then the 2029 pick they got in that deal was the second most favorable of the 3 picks Portland had. So you're not even getting the upside of like, wow, if the Bucks are terrible, we might get a top 5 pick out of this. That trade looks terrible right now. I was okay with the Trae Young acquisition in a vacuum just because I thought those younger guys needed somebody to like kind of push their development along a little bit, like having an organizer at point guard is going to be helpful. The reporting since that trade has been that like they're expected to give him an extension. It's one of those things where like they probably talked about it before the trade happened. We don't know the exact parameters. What I've pitched to you and what we've talked about is something like what Rudy Gobert did, where he had that player option at the back end. He declined it. He took a 25% pay cut and then got 3 new years. So, or 2 new years, I guess, since you have the player option year. But you re-signed for something like 3 years at a slightly lower AAV. I think that made sense for Minnesota because they very directly needed short-term savings in order to re-sign Naz Reid and Julius Randle of the second apron. I don't know that Washington gains anything materially by lowering Trae Young's salary next year, but I would be really hesitant to give him 2 new guaranteed years before you even like see what you have. I know he's going to debut on Thursday. I don't know when we're releasing this, but we're recording this before Thursday's Wizards Jazz game. So either he is about to debut or he just debuted. What he does this season is kind of immaterial. They're in a tank. Like, I don't think you can really gain much from that. I would have really wanted to see how next year plays out before deciding if I wanted to commit an extra 2 years to him. They might draft a point guard. We don't know who their lottery pick is. By the way, I would argue that the most important player in their rebuild is a player who's not on the team yet. It's that 2026 draft pick because they don't have somebody right now who we presume to be capable of being the best player on a true championship contender. Therefore, I think you need to like leave some flexibility for whoever you wind up picking to say like, okay, let's leave ourselves the maneuverability to say if Trae Young doesn't work, okay, fine, doesn't fit with Darren Peterson, with if we draft a point guard, whoever it is, we need to get off of him. If you extend him, that makes that significantly harder. I mean, I know there's the threat of like, he could leave as a free agent in 2027. My response is kind of like, so what? Nobody wanted him anyway. I don't think there are going to be big offers out there for him. And even if there are, great. That means he outperformed your expectations. You got an all-star giving up absolutely nothing in a cap dump. Like, I would rather watch him play like an all-star again and then have to give him the max and say, awesome, we feel good about the player we have because we've seen it, than sign him early and say, we are stuck with him no matter how he looks. This is a player that nobody else in the league wanted. I don't know if I trust Washington to be like, everybody else was wrong, we're right. I totally disagreed with the Anthony Davis trade as well. I thought they gave up their cap flexibility for a player at the very best who might return to his old form next year. But because of the fact that he's in his mid-30s and has all these durability issues, is almost certainly not going to be a star when their young core is ready to seriously win. So aside from the standard tanking stuff of like, yeah, good job, you cleared the decks, you got a couple of lottery picks, great. I like that vision. I just don't agree with any of the other big moves that they've made.
So I hear you. I know that this does seem kind of like these are the type of moves that if they go wrong, and I think what would make them go wrong is if they extend these guys on contracts that could just hamstring them in the future. I'm with you on the Trae situation where I don't see the rush on extending him now or even the off season, even if he declines a player option and takes less. You're right, because that money is not really going to matter too much for the Wizards for improving the roster next year. I think they already have like a good amount of tax space. Like, how much better could he make the roster while still needing to play all these other guys? I would say even like take him to free agency. Like let
Yeah,
him.
what's out there for him?
Let's see. First of all, like how about a full year of him in there, like, or at least half a season, like through the trade deadline. Let's see, like, this is actually like working. You're actually where you want to be. This is fulfilling the vision that you had when you made this trade. But then also, I would say, yeah, take him to free agency, see what's out there. I would suspect that they'll probably get him on an even better deal if they take him to free agency. So, like, I understand that's not how these things work. I think you're right. Probably the groundwork, the frameworks of an extension is already mostly like agreed upon. I'm sure he's going to get something that a lot of people feel like is more than what was necessary for him. But so we'll see. You might be right on that one. As far as the Denny trade, I I think the value is fine as if you just look at the picks. The big issue is that they didn't do well on the first pick. The more immediate one with Bub Carrington. If they took someone else better, and I can't go back and look and see. I'm not sure who else could have been a better pick. Then I think the conversation would be a lot different. But overall, I think the value is okay. But you're right. The most likely they are going to lose value on that trade. But I think that's just one small like loss in a transaction against like they
No,
pretty
no,
much win
no.
all their.
That is not a small loss. That's giving up a 20, I think he's 25, 24 now. 25-year-old all-star on the best contract in the NBA. Like, he would be the best player on their team. That is not a small loss.
I think it's like, and as far as like losing the transaction, that's one loss that they pretty much won every other transaction for the most part. Like,
But they lost the most important. Like, that's the thing. That is the single most important transaction that has occurred under this front office. And right now it looks like a loss. At the very least, they misevaluated their own player. Can you at least agree to that?
Yeah, I think they thought that this is kind of as good as it was going to get with him. I doubt it was a situation where if they kept him, is he going to ruin the tank? He wasn't going to ruin the tank.
No,
they probably thought
they had protected the tank very, very well.
Yeah. But either way, I think they're a little higher than this tier.
So I think the comparison that I made in the story was to Utah in that they were both these teams that had gone on prolonged multi-year tanks, and they had both tried to say like next year is the year that we're going to try to win because they both coincidentally owe top 8 protected picks to other teams. The Jazz drafted somebody in Keontae George that I think is the best drafted player of either of these teams. They also traded for a 26-year-old in Jaren Jackson as opposed to Anthony Davis, who's 33. I know they obviously paid more to do that, but I look at the Jazz and I say, even in the West, I see a pretty clear path to them winning 50 games next year. Like, that doesn't seem crazy to me. They could be a top 6 team next year. I don't really see that with the Wizards. And I just look at where their long-term outlook is right now. They are so dependent on the 2026 lottery. If they get one of these top 3 guys and they get a franchise player out of this, all is forgiven. And they suddenly look a lot better because all of these guys that they've drafted, I think would be very good with a star to orbit around. But if they don't get that guy, if they're picking 5th or 6th and the guy they draft is just a good starter, I don't know where they are in 2 or 3 years, because at that point, Anthony Davis is going to be done. I think we both are low on Trae Young as a long-term core player, and the guys they have are just kind of good starters and not people that we look at and say foundational piece. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think so much of their future upside is wrapped up in one lottery, and I think that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, we'll see. Either way, we agree they're not they're not a top front office. It's not like the top of the top or anything like that. I just think we just differ a little bit on where they are in like the half to like bottom half.
Yeah, I think even with like we talked about this in episode 2, I'd probably move Denver down a little bit. So like, yeah, maybe you could move Washington up a spot or 2, but I'm still not crazy about what they did. They have to, after losing the Denny Avdija trade in the way that they did, I kind of need to see a longer track record of success before I'm willing to say they're like an above average front office.
All right, moving on to Toronto.
The Raptors, number 23, the Jakob Poeltl contract makes me want to vomit. It is one of the least explicable decisions that I think a team has made. I can't say like the worst decision a team has made in the last year or like whatever the time frame is because the Luka trade hovers over every comment like that. It is one of the least explicable decisions that I've seen a team make. Jakob Poeltl had 2 years left on his deal. Like if he's angling for a new contract, I kind of wanted to say like, so what? Like why do you have to extend this guy who's getting older, whose performance is declining? Why are you adding 2 extra expensive years on the back of his contract? And like right now, that looks kind of like a debacle. They couldn't trade that contract at the deadline. Made absolutely zero sense. They have, for whatever reason, vastly overestimated Jakob Poeltl on several occasions. They traded a pick that turned out to be number 8 overall to get Jakob Poeltl. Like, I don't know what they saw in him that made that make sense, but like the guy they were trading for maybe defensively existed for a brief time in San Antonio, but he has not been that guy since. Gotten better on offense. Now he has these durability issues. That's a debacle. Everybody on the team is slightly overpaid. I guess not Scotty Barnes. Him on the max is fine. Emmanuel Quickly making, I don't know what the exact, it's like 32.5 a year.
It's like over 20%.
Yeah, but to be a below average starting point guard, Emmanuel Quickley's a good player. And he's the kind of guard that I want in this version of the NBA because he can defend, because he can shoot. He doesn't have to run the whole offense, but the Raptors need him to run the whole offense. And I don't know that he's quite capable of doing that. So that's a little bit of an overpay. Giving Brandon Ingram the 3-year, $120 million extension on the trade, again, made little sense to me. We had just spent the previous 9 months establishing that there was not that much interest on the market for Brandon Ingram. There was no cap space out there in free agency. I would have tried to negotiate him down a little bit harder. I don't know why they didn't, beyond the basic idea that like that's not how things are done with a player of that caliber. They traded for RJ Barrett, so him being overpaid is out of their control, I guess. But you look at the OG Anunoby trade, to not get a single first round pick out of that is kind of crazy. It's a debacle. The Pascal Siakam trade, they get 3 first round picks that are all mostly bad. I know one of those picks was Indiana's top 4 protected pick this year, but they traded it before that came into play as a really valuable asset. And we couldn't have seen that coming. That was a fluke. Masai Ujiri is not there anymore. I kind of struggled with what to do with that because they did promote internally. I believe Bobby Webster is, I don't know if his title is president of basketball operations, but is in the nominal GM chair. And I do think there are some things that they do well. I liked the Colin Murray-Boyles pick. The Darko Rajakovic hire, I am a fan of. I think he's been a pretty good coach for them. I've liked a lot of the things they've done. They've outperformed their talent this year. They are very clearly in a position where they need one more core player, right? Like Barnes is very, very good. He's probably the second best player on a contender and not the best player on a contender. The problem is all of their contracts that they might want to trade for that other superstar are viewed negatively. So you're probably going to have to overpay asset-wise, and that's before getting into some of the issues with trying to attract players to Toronto. That can be a little bit difficult. So I kind of look at them as sort of a team that's stuck in the middle, maybe slightly above the middle. I'm not sure what their plan to get from there into like legitimate conference title contention is.
Yeah, you pretty much went over everything in my notes. I don't have too much more to add. I wanted to start about the Masai issue, the Masai factor, because when he left, I think we were both wondering, like, did he fall off? Because a lot of we basically disagreed with almost all the decisions he had made in the past 5-6 years, other than picking Scotty Barnes, obviously. And no, it seems like they're kind of operating the same exact way as if he was still there. They're drafting the same, kind of proceeding with free agency the same way. Like, is there anything different about the way they've operated since he left?
No, it feels like they have the same basic organizational philosophy.
Yeah. So you talked about them choosing to go after certain guys like RJ, who already has that negative value contract, but then also bringing in Ingram, bringing in Emmanuel Quickly and Poeltl, like identifying these guys. These are the guys we want to build around Scotty Barnes, which all have questionable at best fits next to him. And then also when you bring a player in like any of them, you got to be ready to pay them. And they just paid all of them with very negative value contracts. And now they're just kind of stuck being mediocre. Like if this is the vision, they just wanted to make the playoffs and that's kind of it. Okay, you accomplished that, but I don't really see how they can break above the first round unless Scotty Barnes becomes a top 5 player, which I don't I don't really think that's going to be in the cards. Um, but they're mostly down here because of mistakes they made in the past. You talked about it. They held on to their guys for too long, got very little for OG Anunoby. They lost Fred VanVleet, didn't get anything for him. The Pascal Siakam trade, they just got like 3 shitty picks. I will say they did end up trading one of those picks, that Pacers pick, for 2026 to the Pelicans for Brandon Ingram. I don't think the Pelicans only deserve to get shit for that. Like, I think the Raptors deserve a little bit of shame for that as well. Like, okay, you got Brandon Ingram, he's a good player. I think almost every other team would rather keep the upside of that pick. I know it was top 4 protected, so no guarantee they'd keep it, but maybe having the gamble like the Clippers now have, a 50% chance of keeping the pick. I think that's probably more worth it than paying Ingram $40 million a year. Yeah, I've got nothing else to say. I think this is like very appropriately slotted for them.
It's interesting how they had a version of a team 3-4 years ago where we felt like they had all of these interesting pieces, but they weren't like good enough to contend. So they break that team up. They lose Van Vliet. They let Siakam go, or they trade Siakam. They trade Anunoby. And then they wind up with like a worse version of that team where, like, wouldn't you rather just have Van Vliet, Anunoby, and Siakam now than Barrett, Quickly, and Ingram?
Yeah, even 2 years later, all those guys that they lost are better than the core pieces they replaced them with.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, when they were viewed as one of the best front offices in the NBA, they were hitting home runs late in the draft like every year, right? Like, they get OG Anunoby in the middle, late of the first round. Pascal Siakam, I think, was like 29, 27, something like that. Van Vliet was undrafted. Like, they had a magic touch where everybody they brought in, they would send them through that G League system. Then they would come up and they would play their bench minutes with Kyle Lowry, and then they would become like high-level starter players. They don't have that magic touch anymore. Where, like, look at the players they've drafted. Jacoby Walter is fine, like, good player. Grady Dick, they seem to have lost confidence in. His playing time has gone way down this year. Jamal Shed, I think, was a very nice find in the second round. Kudos on that. But they don't have the magic touch anymore where every young player they bring in within 2 or 3 years is immediately like vastly superior to where they found him.
I've got a theory on that. I wonder if the league just caught up to the Raptors picking these specific archetypes that they picked 10 years ago, and now they're starting to take them earlier. Whereas Colin Murray Boyles, they took him at the middle of the lottery. Maybe that's the type of player you could have gotten in the late 20s 10 years ago. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting idea. I'd have to look at it more closely, but I broadly think you're right. I think length and wings in general tend to be drafted much higher now than they were 5-10 years ago. So I think you're probably onto something with that.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that a little more when I have time.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the Raptors that we need to hit. I think more or less covers it. Yes.
All right. So then next up, now we're getting into teams, I think. It's kind of pick your poison. Milwaukee Bucks. You've got them 24th? Yeah.
Yes, the Milwaukee Bucks at 24. I know some fans will say, oh, but they won a championship with this front office. And we're going to get into that with the next team too. Trust me. First of all, John Horst did not draft Giannis Antetokounmpo. He did not trade for Chris Middleton. He did good to trade for Jrue Holiday when he took over, but that has kind of been John Horst's only real pitch, right? He takes these huge swings. Trading for Jrue Holiday, which worked out, great move, wins you a championship. Trading for Damian Lillard, defensible, it didn't work out, but like, I think the theory of it was okay. I think at the time, we both would have made that trade. Waiving Damian Lillard, signing Miles Turner thus far has kind of not gone well. It has not worked out in the way that they would have hoped.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Between the 2021 trade deadline when they acquired PJ Tucker, like, what is the most impactful addition they did before bringing in Miles Turner?
It's probably getting AJ Green. Like, I'm trying to think of who the
That's on my list. It's like AJ Green, Ryan Rollins on a two-way. Like, that's the thing that jumps out to me, they have not brought in anyone since the championship season, in my opinion, that like meaningfully improved the rotation around Giannis. Like to me, the rotation, the roster, the quality of it just got worse and worse and worse and worse each year since, which is kind of impressive, honestly, that that's what was accomplished. So yeah, keep going, because you were talking about some more of these, like the Dame trade. That was just kind of a lateral move in the end. But yeah, keep going.
They took some win now stabs that really didn't work. Like, remember when they traded Dante DiVincenzo for washed Serge Ibaka? I bet they would really like that one back. But it seems like when they need to do something big, they always find some creatively aggressive way to try to do it. Whether or not it works out is a separate thing. Some of them have, some of them haven't, but they haven't really done well enough on the margins behind those big moves to like make a team with Giannis and Dame making max money and no picks able to work, right? Like Giannis and Dame were more or less, the fit didn't work as well as we would have hoped, but they were both still all NBA caliber players. They just didn't have the supporting cast around those guys to make it work. They went several years where like AJ Green was the only guy internally that they had developed. Ryan Rollins has really jumped out this year. There have been some moments from Ousmane Dieng, who they acquired at the trade deadline. Like this year looks a little bit better, but they went several years where they just weren't developing young guys at all. And there were young guys that they had in the building that escaped. Like Mamu would have been really nice for them. They had him in the building. He
Oh, that's
left.
right.
Like
They had him.
they've
I
had
almost
a
forgot
couple of
about that.
guys who have gone on to be okay for other teams. So they just have not done a good enough job of developing internally when it comes to the younger guys. The coaching stuff is like really, really bad looking at it now. So they have Mike Budenholzer. I understand why they fired him. I maybe wouldn't have, but it seemed as though, I'm not going to say Giannis wanted it, but he kind of hinted at it at least. He seemed to have a hand in the hire of Griffin, and that hire was a debacle. They get out of it after 50 games or whatever. And then they hired Doc Rivers, who was just very behind the times in the way that he coaches. I've said this maybe on other podcasts. I don't know if I've said it to you. It feels kind of fitting that this offensive rebounding revolution is happening right as Doc Rivers' coaching tenure in Milwaukee seems like it's headed toward the end, because for years, Doc Rivers' whole thing was my teams do not offensive rebound. And it's like, well, now it feels appropriate that you're the least offensive rebounding team in a league that values offensive rebounding more than it used to. But like Doc Rivers has not done a good job coaching that team. And you look at the first time coaching hires around the league lately, almost all of them have worked out, right? Like Joe Mazzulla, Charles Lee, Darko Rajakovic, like these young coach, Jordan Ott, Jordy Fernandez, all of these guys have come along very well. We're in like kind of a golden age of young coaches. Even JJ Redick, I think, has some personality stuff that I have questions about, but is a very smart basketball strategist. And the Bucks got the one first-time hire lately among these high-profile hires wrong in Griffin, and then Doc Rivers was just kind of like, okay, we need a famous guy with some gravitas. Doesn't really matter that he's kind of behind the times. I feel like I don't fully know what the vision here is, other than like keep Giannis happy, keep getting him to extend. I don't know how they expect to put a winner around Giannis. And like we've talked about this in other episodes, we think they should have moved Giannis already. They didn't. I understand that, it's hard to break up with a player who is like not only a franchise icon, he's the franchise icon. He's the best player the Bucks have ever had, save maybe Kareem, but Kareem wasn't there as long as Giannis has been. I understand it's hard to admit to yourself that it's not going to happen here, but it's not going to happen here. And the longer they wait with every decision they make, the more I think they're digging themselves a hole it's going to be harder and harder to dig themselves out of. Like they brought Giannis back last night as we record. They got waxed by the Celtics. They're probably going to keep Giannis until it's clear they're out of the play-in race. They're 3.5 games behind the Hornets as of this recording, 4 games behind the Hawks, who I think are more catchable. They play the Hawks a couple times in the next 10 days or so. They lose those games, it's flat out over for them. I would hope they'll have the sense to pull Giannis out after that, not risk further injury. With multiple calf strains in a given season, I would be pretty concerned about playing him down the stretch in games that don't matter. They seem to disagree with that, but we'll see how that goes in the next couple weeks. But like, I don't really understand most of the decisions that they're making. I'm not sure what the vision here is beyond desperately trying to convince Giannis to keep extending.
I know that it's hard for the organization to just actually leave the Giannis here. I get all those dynamics. I think though they have already lost maybe like 20, maybe even 30% of the total value. They were like the optimal value they could have gotten for him if they traded him, say, 2 years ago, which is probably when they should have started seriously considering moving him.
I think last
Uh,
summer was the first time it was really feasible.
I
At least
think they're
when Dame got hurt, that was when it was like, okay, it's over.
I think though, like the peak was around 23, 24. That's when teams were just willing to trade everything for somebody. I think part of the reason he hasn't been moved yet is because they just haven't even gotten those types of offers like at that level anymore. That you would have
Would
hoped
you
that
even
like a
make
KD
that
level
kind of offer though? Like, I wouldn't make that kind of offer. Would you?
if you're another team.
Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm saying. I think 2 years ago was probably that window. So I think they lost a lot of value there. I don't think it's really dawned on people just how damaging that Damian Lillard stretch is going to end up being. And for what? Like a pretty good starting center who, like, how much value are you even going to get for him in a trade? Like maybe one good first round pick?
I'm
Like,
not
this
even
is
sure.
like no one's really focused on that now because all the attention is on Giannis. When are they going to trade him? And I think eventually there's going to be moments when they're trying to build a team in the future where that what is that, like a $20 million cap hit, $22 million dead cap hit is just going to get in the way of stuff. But yeah,
Wait,
so you
before you move
talk.
on from Miles Turner, I just want to I think I have a way to visualize this for people. Miles Turner is making 25.3 million this year, but Damian Lillard is also making like 22, right? Like that's what his cap charge is.
Yeah,
So then basically what that means is you're paying Miles Turner like 47 million this year. You're paying him like 49 million next year. Then you're paying him like 50 and then 52 the year after that. Like that's basically how it works. That's what your cap charge is.
yeah,
It's like you're functionally paying $50 million a year for Miles Turner.
yeah. Um, you mentioned we already went over their lack of identifying young talent, and once they do have a couple guys, if they move on from them a little too early or they don't really see the potential. Overall, I think they're just down here because this is probably one of the worst management of a supporting cast around the superstar in history. Like the one that I think is comparable, and I'm interested to see what you think, which one you think is worse, is the Wolves and Kevin Garnett, like in the mid to late 2000s. Like it feels like we're reaching that level of wasted prime around Giannis.
I don't know if I get to that level just because they won the championship, but it's also like if Kevin Durant's foot was a little bit smaller, they don't win that championship, and we probably look at it somewhat similarly. I'm wondering, like, was there a move like the Drew Holiday trade that the Timberwolves could have made in 2004? Like, could they have traded 4 first-round picks for Tracy McGrady when the Magic traded Steve Francis for him and like maybe gotten their one title with KG that way? I don't know, but like I think it's a little bit more like Denver with Jokic. I think the versions of the builds are a little bit different. And I think Denver has been a little bit smarter about the kinds of players that they found for him. But it is kind of similar in that you have a guy who, in another point in NBA history, you think we're going to win 3 or 4 titles with this player. Like we have a perpetual MVP candidate, and you only get the one. And then you look at all of these wasted opportunities in other years because of bad moves that they've made, because you've gotten the wrong guys around them, because you moved on from your coach too late, whatever it is. I think Jokic and Giannis are a bit more analogous than KG and Giannis, but I do see what you're saying.
One.
One more Bucks thing that I wanted to cover. We have not said the name Kyle Kuzma yet today, and we probably should, because that trade, it might not wind up being super significant, but there's a little caveat that we need to address here. Aside from the fact that Kyle Kuzma has not been good for them, or at least as good as they would have hoped, and he's very expensive into next year, they gave up secondary swap rights on their 2028 first round pick. Portland has primary swap rights on that pick. But something to keep in mind is that Portland also owes a lottery protected pick to the Chicago Bulls. If the Bulls, or rather, if the Blazers do not make the playoffs in 26 and 27, maybe, like, I'd say that's like a coin flip that they'll make it in one of those years. But then they do make it in 28. Now the Bucks could have kept control of their 2028 first round pick, but they made the Kyle Kuzma trade. So instead they would lose control of that pick to Washington. So a very small decision that they made in that trade could turn out to have absolutely enormous implications down the line.
Right. Yeah, just a lot of low upside, and like, they, for the most part, they've only traded their picks for Drew and Lillard. But then this one, even though just like a swap didn't seem like that harmful back then, it's going to make rebuilding over these next few years post Giannis a lot more difficult.
This is something that we haven't talked about enough, but I think is becoming more important in this era where so many teams owe out so many picks. Secondary swaps in certain situations can become a lot more valuable than you think they are when you trade them. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on. We'll probably talk about that in more depth at some other point. But like something we've seen with Phoenix, something we'll see with a couple other teams, those can become a little bit more important. But I think that's everything we need to say about the Bucks. Moving on to the team that I write about probably the most is the Los Angeles Lakers at number 25. Yossi, I'm going to read you Rob Pelinka's last 5 mid-level exceptions. Are you ready?
Yes.
Montrezl Harrell, Kendrick Nunn, Lonnie Walker, Gabe Vincent, and then DeAndre Ayton and Jake LaRavia. Is there a hit in that group? Their last 2 first-round picks are Dalton Knecht and Jalen Hood-Schifino, neither of whom appear to be NBA players. And by the way, these are not like number 29 overall picks. These are picks like right after the lottery. Those are 2 very, very big misses. Traded a first-round pick for Dennis Schroeder. That did not turn out well. Traded a first-round pick to get off Russell Westbrook. They get D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt, and who was third? Malik Beasley was third player. They
also
let Beasley
traded
go.
a first to get Russell Westbrook.
Traded a first to get Russell Westbrook, but I was ready to ignore that.
Well, yeah.
My point is the only player left from that Russell Westbrook trade to Utah is Jared Vanderbilt, who they gave a bad extension to, who they probably now regret. D'Angelo Russell kind of fell off with them, and then they let Beasley go, of course. They've had a lot of good, younger, marginal find players like Scottie Pippen and Jay Huff and Jordan Goodwin, and they have let all of them go. All of them look like real NBA players now. That really hurts. They get handed Luka on a silver platter, and they have done basically nothing with him. They have not added a single player that I think we would look at as a long-term starter. The way they operate as a team seems to be very based on finding name value, right? They're always on the lookout for former lottery picks, whether it's Jackson Hayes or DeAndre Ayton, Cam Reddish, Rui Hachimura, Malik Monk. They add former lottery picks who have failed with their first team or maybe their second team all of the time. And then when they add veterans, it's guys who are past their prime, but who at one point were very, very successful. They needed a defender. They go after Marcus Smart, a former defensive player of the year. Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook, et cetera, et cetera. They really value name value and like star upside, which is how they wind up keeping Talen Horton-Tucker and not keeping Alex Caruso. Although while we're on that topic, they could have kept both. It was not necessarily a basketball decision. It was just a luxury tax decision. They had full bird rights in Alex Caruso. They could have kept him. That is kind of where I'm at with the Lakers. And maybe under Mark Walter, they will beef up the front office enough that they do better on the margins than they have in the past. But they have made very bad use of their resources under Rob Pelinka. And it seems as though Rob Pelinka is going to remain the general manager, president of basketball ops, I don't know what his title is, for the foreseeable future, even with Mark Walter taking over the team. I disagree with that. I don't think he's done a good enough job to prove that he deserves to keep it. He's hired 4 head coaches. How many GMs get that chance, right? He hires Luke Walton. I guess that's with Magic Johnson. But then Frank Vogel, then Darvin Ham, now JJ Redick.
No. He didn't. No. Luke Walton was Kupchak.
Luke Walton was Kupchak? Oh, okay. Then I'll take that
2016,
back.
yeah, right before, yeah.
He's overseen, he's been able to fire a lot of coaches and then hire their replacements. Because he did fire Luke Walton. That he was in the chair then. I don't know. Would having a better scouting staff make them change who they use their mid-level on? I don't know. Like, I just disagree with the way that they've allocated their resources. I disagree with their priorities as an organization. The Luka trade was a good negotiation. I'll give them credit for that. Like, getting Nico to make that trade without including Austin Reeves, without including both their first round picks, without including swaps. Okay, good work. Good job in the negotiation. I don't know how many more dumb friends Rob Pelinka has. I don't think that's a replicable feat. I don't think there's anybody else out there who's going to happen to want the one guy that you have enough to make another trade like that. I think that was a black swan event. Do you agree?
Yes. Do you know how when a team in sports win a championship, there's like a championship sheen that people kind of debate how many years that lasts? Like, okay, you win a championship, now, for 5 years you can feel good about it, and you kind of have to trust the team, the ownership, front office to get to that, that they'll do things right. I think Rob Pelinka answered the question of how much of a window you get of like pretty much no criticism after lucking into getting a top player for virtually nothing. It's like roughly a year. I don't think anyone really is giving him credit for that move anymore, uh, or anyone even like cares that much, because I partly people realizing it fell in his lap. Uh, Partly also Luka isn't looking like a top 5 player, might be more closer to like top 10ish, but mainly the roster around Luka is terrible. And obviously there's an admission that the roster isn't prepared for him because they just pivoted from like one type of team to another. And that's what the cap space is for, the upcoming cap space plans. But cap space has not really worked out for the Lakers in the past 6 years. Like basically it was just 2019. And that one, even though they got like it worked out for them, like it actually didn't work out because they thought they were getting Kawhi. And they were just pretty fortunate that guys like Danny Green, KCP, Avery Bradley stuck around long enough, and that LeBron and AD were like just still had enough of their peak left to deliver a championship.
Well, I'm glad you bring this up. This is something that I've said a few times, and depending on how Laker fans feel about Pelinka in a given moment, sometimes they'll agree, sometimes they won't. The 2019 team, to some extent, was like kind of an accident, or at least it wasn't something that I'm really eager to give the front office credit for. LeBron was not recruited to LA. LeBron wanted to come to LA. And then LeBron went out and got Anthony Davis. The front office paid the price, but it's not like they got Anthony Davis because they were this really well-managed team. He was so impressed. He's like, yeah, I want to go play for the team managed by these people. He wanted to play with LeBron. That's what happened. They tried to sign Kawhi as third guy. It would have worked out really well in that first year. Afterward, we have other questions. But they got very lucky that the role players they needed happened to be the guys who were willing to wait on the market and not sign with other teams in free agency. If Danny Green, I guess Rondo wasn't really super valuable at the time. But like if those guys, KCP, had been willing to take offers from other teams and didn't want to wait out this Lakers situation, they wouldn't have any championships, and we'd probably be having a very different conversation right now.
Also, I do want to push, like, I kind of like deconstructing that free agency, that the 2019, because they got like I just want to pull it up really quickly. Maybe I don't know if I'll be able to show it because it's like an older cap sheet, but they paid Danny Green like real money. They paid him like $15 million. They paid KCTP real money, like $8 million. They gave Avery Bradley the room mid level. But then there's these guys like JaVale McGee, Quinn Cook, Caruso at the time, who wasn't like the Caruso we know now, and Rondo. They all got like slightly above the minimum. They just like had so much cap space left over that like these guys who were like objectively all minimum players at the time, in that free agency, like they just kind of gave him a little more money. Like there wasn't another player they could have given like, I don't know, $8-9 million instead. So there is a lot of luck, I think, that everything worked out the way they did. But you just touched on everything. The drafting was really bad. Identifying certain players, it feels like it's based on what they accomplished like 3 years ago. Like Smart won Defensive Player of the Year 3 years ago. Aiden helped help push the Suns to the finals 4 years ago. Like there's countless other players you could look at where it seems like they're paying for things in the past. You mentioned some of the bad negotiations, like contract negotiations, like for Jared Vanderbilt. There's a couple other. Okay, yeah, I think you mentioned Kendrick Nunn. There's D'Angelo
Well, there's a broader
Russell, Gabe
trend. Why does
Vincent.
every player they sign get a player option?
I was actually about to get to that. They just constantly give like all their minimum level signings player options. Even the ones that are slightly above it, they get player options as well. Like them and the Bucks, they just hand out player options like it's Halloween candy. Um, the one other thing, yeah. So like, that was the other thing. Just some of these negotiations just left a lot to be desired.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I had something there for a second. Oh, even when they have successes, like Dwight Howard was a home run of a signing for the minimum. It was kind of in that same vein, right? Where it's like, oh, former famous player who's fallen on hard times. We think we can get him for cheap and maybe he'll work out. Like, I don't know that I would necessarily call that like smart front officing, just taking somebody who was really good in the past and hoping he can be really good again under the right circumstances. And I think that's been working out less and less lately. So, yeah, I will see what happens when Mark Walter really invests in the front office. I kind of look at this and say it doesn't really matter what you do to the body if you have the same head. I think what's probably going to happen is they're going to have an underwhelming offseason this year, and they will probably lose in the first or second round next year because, I mean, that's not even a matter of like where they are. That's just San Antonio and Oklahoma City being so overwhelming, and Houston having all of these assets, and Minnesota and Denver being as good as they are, and Utah starting to get a lot better. Like the West is really, really good. I think in all likelihood, like the likeliest outcome for them next year is losing in the first or the second round. And by that point, then it'll start to look a little bit worse for Pelinka. But it's like, well, if he spent all the cap space and maybe spent some of the picks, I don't know where that's going to leave them. Like, it's very, very important that they get their next transaction cycle or two right, because this is when they're going to have the ammunition. If they miss on these, they're kind of stuck and it doesn't look great.
If they can't put a good roster around Luka this summer or the next, I do think like you got this life raft with Luka, getting him for virtually nothing. I think they'd have to strongly consider just trade rating him and getting him to a position where he could succeed and just starting over, getting your picks back. Cause like this is like 2 years of like you have real money to spend and not too many draft picks, but some that you could try to get some like this is the time to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, he's a free agent in 2028. That's 2 years from now. Now, I don't know if Luka is so happy being in LA that he would be willing to stay if the team isn't up to snuff, but like he'll make his next contract decision. I mean, I guess he could extend earlier. I don't know when his extension date is, but he'll be a free agent again when he's 29. When he's 29, he'll still have time to be like, "Hey, I'm in my prime. I'm a max player. I can go to not a team of my choice because Oklahoma City and San Antonio will be capped out, but like I can go pick the organization of my choice in the city of my choice for the most part with the star teammate that I want to play with and feel pretty good about my ability to contend." Like if the Lakers aren't in that position in a couple of years, I don't know that it's a given that he's going to want to stay there. We'll see. The one
Yeah.
thing that they've really gotten right was Austin Reeves, but like imagine if Detroit just picked him. Like for those who don't know, the Pistons wanted to draft Austin Reeves, number 42 overall in the 2021 draft, and Austin Reeves and his agent said like, "No, we would rather be undrafted free agents and sign a two-way with a preferable situation." And the Pistons listened to that, and the rest is history. If the Pistons had drafted Austin Reeves, where would the Lakers be today? If the Lakers hadn't gotten Luka, where would they be today with Anthony Davis's value cratering immediately after that trade and LeBron now looking like he'll either retire or go somewhere else? Like without luck, I really don't know where this team would be.
All right. So yeah, I think this is they're kind of adequately placed. So then you've got Phoenix. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Phoenix is interesting, and their fans got mad at me for this ranking. And like as I think about it, I might have more faith in the moves that Phoenix will make moving forward than the moves that the Lakers will make moving forward. Almost because like the Suns have learned their lesson, whereas being the Lakers means never having to learn your lesson because mana keeps falling from heaven right into your lap. That just doesn't happen for most teams, but it does for the Lakers. Phoenix has had a good year. Like the Mark Williams trade worked out. Dylan Brooks fixed the culture. Jordan Goodwin, really good signing. Getting Colin Gillespie on the margins, like he's been a really, really good find for them. Like I am a lot more optimistic about the Suns than I was a year ago. Jordan Ott, very, very good hire. it seems like they're moving in the right direction. I also think, and I know you agree with me on this, there's a little bit of fool's gold here. And next year, when they have less shooting luck and when the culture stuff is like faded away a little bit, and when it's less exciting to be like a play-in-ish team, maybe they'll look a little bit worse. I think they're probably like in the long run, the 11th or 12th best team in the West, not the 6th or 7th best team in the West. But they're making better decisions now than they were a year or two ago when they were a tire fire and the Beal trade was a debacle and the Durant trade blew up in their face and they're changing coaches every year. I think Matt Ishbia has learned some of his lessons. And I know this isn't a basketball consideration. I do just want to say I really like Matt Ishbia as like an owner for the business. Like I think he's somebody who's a very good owner for the fan experience between putting the games over the air in Phoenix and how cheap the food is at that arena and like offering $1 million to whoever wins the dunk contest or whatever. Like, I do appreciate that. That doesn't factor into these rankings. I do just want to say, if I'm going to say somebody's a bottom 5 organization in the NBA, let me find the compliments where I can. I'll give him credit for that at least.
Yeah, no, he's definitely the best owner when it comes to fan experience. Like, I guess the off the court stuff. I mean, technically, it's on the court. Um, you do point out that the Suns clearly are capable of making really good decisions, getting some really good draft picks on the margins, identifying the right players to build around. It's just that they kind of got forced to going into this direction once they had to trade Kevin Durant and they stretched Bradley Beal and they opened up some flexibility. Like they once this they couldn't rely on elite scorers to carry a team. That's when they had to start investing more in playmakers, ball handlers, and big men. So they're okay. I think they're okay. Otherwise, they negotiate solid contracts until they don't. The Grayson Allen one not looking too great, even though he's having a much better year.
They were bird rights trapped, and the same was true with Royce O'Neal.
I do not like the Devin Booker contract. I'm curious to see where I rank them once we do our worst contracts rankings, hopefully in the next month. I think that despite this good season they're having, they're still maybe in the worst position out of any NBA team in the league. Like you can point to, like we're going to go over some of the other teams that we're about to go over. Like some of them still have like a cornerstone player or somewhat like half a cornerstone player that they could point to and look forward to, and most of their draft picks to work with. The Suns, they don't have their draft pick on the in the odd numbered years. In the even number years, they traded basically all their swaps. So they're
multiple times too. It's so not like they're going to be picking in the 20s in all of those drafts because they have multiple swap rights out.
Yeah. So whatever picks they have left are going to be very low value. I just still don't see what the upside is. So if they are happy being this kind of mediocre-ish playing team, good for them. But they're going to be stuck in the middle with no picks, with no real, I guess you want to say downward trajectory because they can't get a lottery pick anytime soon. So because of the marginal things, they're not like in the bottom tier. Like they're very good when they need to be. I just think they should use this season. I've said this time and time again, use this season to try to actually get more draft picks, some young players to build for the future. I think there's more value in that. Try to get positive value for Booker now while you still can. Even the same for Dillon Brooks. I know we've disagreed on this, but he's going to be extension eligible this offseason. Like, are we sure he's going to replicate this offensively going forward? How much more do you want to pay him if you're the Suns to be like hopefully a 7-8 seed again? So I think that's where it kind of the forward thinking in this ends. I don't expect them to. I think they're just going to keep trying to maximize whatever they've got. I mean, Matt Ishbia even said it, like, hey, like tanking, that's loser behavior. This is not something I'm ever going to engage in.
That was hilarious because he said that after he traded all of his picks. Like, man, tanking isn't an option for you. Like that, I don't really know how seriously to take that. And there was the story about the GM call about tanking with Adam Silver, where like Sean Marks was asking like, "Oh, is this going to affect this year?" And Silver says like, "No, your only incentive next year is going to be to win." And it's like, well, yeah, he doesn't control his pick next year, so like, let's. I always find it funny when we get those tanking comments from teams who are not really in a position to tank. If you were just trying to maximize championship equity, which I think is how we generally think of running teams, you would liquidate everything, right? You would have traded Devin Booker last offseason. You would have flipped Dylan Brooks. Like right now, you'd be saying, can we get a first for Colin Gillespie? Can we get like good picks for Oso Ighodaro? It's a very nice find, by the way. We didn't mention him earlier. Like we wouldn't be thinking re-signing. I guess you re-sign Mark Williams, then you try to trade him. But I think it's just unrealistic for a team to actually function and say, we're going to trade away with maybe the most popular player in team history and just totally admit defeat for the next 5 years so we can get a bunch of picks that are probably going to be in the 20s, right? Like, I just don't think that's a realistic way to run an NBA team. So I would have traded Devin Booker. I was very clear on that. But now they've gone down this path enough where it's like, look, they're going to try to be competitive in the next few years. Do I think they're ultimately going to be successful in that endeavor? No. What I think is going to happen is Devin Booker is going to continue to decline. He's not going to be worth the money that he's getting paid. And they'll have years where their role players get hurt and the mood in the locker room isn't nearly as positive. And they'll start giving lottery picks to the Rockets and to the Wizards and whoever else they owe their picks to. So do I think their outlook is especially bright? No, I don't. But do I think they're making better decisions now than they were a year or two ago? Like, probably I do. Like, I think Brian Gregory was an unconventional hire, but has mostly done about as well in that position as you could hope for. Jordan Ott was a great coaching hire, I think, so far. Obviously, it's different when you're coaching a team just trying to get into the play-in versus a team with real championship aspirations, but I think he's been a very, very good hire so far. The Malawach pick has not shown much yet, but I think he was always kind of a project. Now, we don't know if they were ever offered the New Orleans Atlanta deal. If they were, that is the single team that was like, oh my God, this could save you. You have to make that trade. But we don't know if they were ever offered it, so I can't punish them too harshly. I would say, here's what I would ask you. Say, like, if you were to swap the Lakers and Suns front offices right now, like Matt Ishbia and Gregory, and I'll even say swap the coaches too.
Ownership as well?
Ownership as well. Like, you swap everything. What would you feel better? Like, which front office would you feel better about steering the Luka era moving forward?
I guess I think the Lakers front office, because I can't get the stench out that like the Suns really destroyed their outlook. They like destroyed everything so quickly. Like, if you're talking about going forward, okay, maybe they don't do that again, but
right, my
they still
argument
did
is
it.
Learned their lesson.
If they actually learned their lesson and they're just going to be more conservative with their draft picks, and the Suns.
Yeah, like you could argue with Mark Walters' investment, the Lakers are better, but like I have understood and appreciated the things the Suns have done this year more than the things the Lakers have done. So like, it's a fair argument, and I might have to move the Suns up a little bit in future installments, but I don't think what they've done this year is all that likely to sustain. I think next year they're going to be more like the 10 seed than the 7 seed.
All right, so next up, we're in the bottom 4. You got the Dallas Mavericks.
You know what's notable about the Mavericks? Is that they don't have a GM. They are ranked ahead of 3 teams that do have a GM, and they don't have a GM.
Yeah,
which should kind of tell you something about 28, 29, and 30.
I'm trying to think about how to separate them from the rest of the group. And it is a little hard to rank them now because they have new management, but then again, the management, like how much of it is kind of maybe on board with Nico? I would guess not that much. And how much of it is going to stick around once they do inevitably make another hire? But I would suspect that just based on their decision to move AD, even though, and not let that dwell, that I agree they're not like the bottom tier now, even though for everything else they did in the last year or so, they probably should be.
Yeah, they're going to be locked towards the bottom of this list for the next few rankings, just because even though Nico is gone, the owner who signed off on the Luka trade is still there, and like that's a deal breaker to me. Like, that was a terrible decision, and until they have like really proven that they don't belong at the bottom, Just that ownership is going to keep them at the bottom. I didn't like the Anthony Davis trade for them as much as you did. They clearly gave up. I don't want to say they could have gotten a massive asset return, but the primary value they got in that trade was cap relief. And we've argued about this. I don't think cap relief was as important to them as you do. I would have been comfortable keeping Anthony Davis and like trying to win next year. But by virtue of him and Kyrie both having 2 years left on their deal, they could have reset their books before Cooper Flagg's max extension comes in. I don't think getting off of the contract was valuable enough to trade Anthony Davis for what basically are 2 fake first round picks.
So let me just quickly push back on that. I think you're right. The thing is, and this is the thing I was about to also get into, is that Nico really doubled down on his vision of this team by not only trading for these guys he likes, some, whether they were good players, good additions or not, they kind of vary. Like PJ Washington, good. Daniel Gafford, good. Caleb Arden, not great. They bring all these guys in, they either already have a pretty big contract or Nico extended everybody. They gave PJ Washington a max extension. He gave Daniel Gafford not a max extension, but like a pretty sizable one as well. Like they didn't have any expiring contracts heading into this upcoming offseason. They were going to run back basically the entire roster and pay even more money because these guys are going to have new extensions kicking in, and they were going to enter the repeater tax if they finished over the tax this year. So Nico kind of handicapped them to the point that they kind of had to take this AD trade and just prioritize tax flexibility. If they didn't extend all these other guys, then maybe they could have waited a little longer and get a little more of like an asset pick value type of return later. But it was gonna be like a $300+ million roster next year. Like that was just untenable.
They could have gotten off of those contracts, though, I think. Like, if they had called the Lakers and said you can have Daniel Gafford for free, I bet they would have taken him. They could get positive value for PJ Washington. Like, there were other ways to find savings. Maybe not as significant as the savings they got, but I don't view getting below the tax line for them as the sort of win that, like, getting below the tax line was for Boston, right? I think the circumstances were very, very different. I would have been comfortable keeping a very expensive team next year and like trying to win and get Cooper Flag some playoff experience because you don't control your pick anyway, right? Like, I don't know that this is just optics. It doesn't really matter, but like you're probably handing the Hornets a lottery pick next year. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So
it's going to be probably 10, at least 12, maybe that range.
Yeah, like somewhere a late lottery pick. And if it jumps up, maybe you have the upside of keeping it. But that's the other thing too, is if the odds change meaningfully, like if let's say the odds are totally flat next year, now you're in the play-in and you're feeling okay. Like you still have a 2 in 14 chance. So
I'm pretty sure that pick is top 2 protected.
Yeah, it's top 2 protected.
Yeah.
So I'm saying there is a chance that it moves up, but like it's just not the direction that I would have gone. They've done some nice things on the margins. Like Brandon Williams is a real NBA player. Ryan Nembhard was a nice find. Max Christie was the throw-in to the Luka trade, has ironically turned out to be a more valuable asset than Anthony Davis. This was something I won a victory lap on, by the way. Last April or last March or whatever, I was saying, hey, I think when we look back on the Luka trade, of course, there are 500 things that come to mind first. But I don't even think that the Mavericks got the most valuable Lakers asset. I think Austin Reeves is going to have more trade value in the near future than Anthony Davis did. People called me a madman. And you know what? I was totally right. So I'm taking a little bit of credit for that. Najee Marshall, nice value contract. Good work. I have some questions about the medical staff. I don't know how we want to handle that, but like between Anthony Davis and some of the Derek Lively stuff and some of that reporting from Tim McMahon, I have some questions. I don't know what they're going to do to address that, but that's something lingering in the back of my mind.
I don't know how to address some of these things that we can't see. But how much more is there? I think partially because a lot of it is just the stink of the Luka trade from a year ago and the fallout from that. But also the just blurriness of who's in charge and who is going to be in charge. I think I just feel like not much else to say. Just kind of leave him here, and we'll see how things go over the next few years.
Yeah, it would take a lot for them to move up in the next few rankings just because like they're going to have a new front office establishing itself. And you're right, the stink of the Luka trade is going to hover over this. Number 28, the Chicago Bulls, who amazingly have now moved up in back-to-back rankings. They were number 30 when I did these at last year's trade deadline. They were 29 last offseason, and they are number 28 at this year's cycle. I applaud them for eventually getting to the point where they realize they need to rebuild and tank. They did it 18 months late, but they did eventually do it right as they lost out on the chance to really tank for 25 and 26, which were the two very good drafts. Like if they would have done this, 18 months ago, okay, now you're talking. Like you could have gotten a chance at Flag. You could have gotten a chance at one of last year's really good prospects. And then this year, of course, it's a great top four. They're going to end up picking like 10th unless they get lucky in the lottery. They got less for Ayo Dosunmu and Kobe White, Nikola Vucevic than they would have if they would have acted earlier. The Patrick Williams contract is an absolute disaster. I like some of the guys that they got in this year's deadlines teardown. I like Rob Dillingham. I like Jaden Ivey. Like, I would be happy to take shots at those guys. I don't know how much I like them together with Anthony Simons and with Colin Sexton. Like, I don't know that they've given any real thought to roster construction. How many players on this year's team are like, would you expect to be likely parts of the next Bulls playoff team, let alone like contending team? Like, I guess Giddey and Buzelis and like Jalen Smith as a backup. Is that it?
I would have just said Buzelis. The thing with Giddey is I wonder if I don't know if this front office sticks around, but if they ever do get a new front office, then you'd have to imagine that Giddey could, that whoever comes in is not going to be so high on Giddey.
At least that contract isn't crazy, right? It's not like they gave him a max. It's like 25 a year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think with the Bulls, you touched on, they held on to everybody forever. They didn't get any value for anybody. Like you got Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. That's the most you got for any of these guys. And he was the best contract that they handed out. Handed out a bunch of horrible contracts between Levine at the peak of the post-COVID extension max contract craze. The DeRozan one was great at first, but then just kind of was okay. They didn't capitalize on that. Vucevic was neutral at best, but then you got Pat Williams. That's kind of dead money now. The thing with that about the Bulls that probably separates himself from the rest of the bottom tier is just, you can point at all these teams and say they just have like bad vision. The direction is bad. The Bulls just have like no vision. I would say like I can't even point to what it is that they want to do. I always say like they're the most unpredictable team heading into any transaction cycle. And lo and behold, this trade deadline, I honestly could not have predicted that this was at all going to be what they wanted to do, where they're kind of like half stepping a rebuild towards the bottom, where they decided, okay, now we're actually going to try to, the play-in's not going to be the priority, but you're already so far ahead in the wins column that you're probably not really going to position yourself well for a lottery pick in this year's draft for like a good one. So it's just like they just always position themselves to be smack dab in the middle, which is generally just the worst place to be. Like all their draft picks in the past few years. Okay, the Buzelis one was looking pretty good. They got lucky that he fell as far as he did. But like all their other draft picks in the past few years, you said it, like who's the guy that you can really feel confident is going to be a part of the next great Bulls team?
I remember at last year's trade deadline, Karnisovas gave this press conference where he's like, well, there are a lot of different ways to build a great team. Like you could have 2 or 3 stars, or you could have 9 or 10 very good players. And my response was, bro, you don't even have 2 or 3 very good players. Like you're not building the depth way. Like you don't even have that. They're so cheap that they gave up a chance at an unprotected King swap in the DeMar DeRozan deal just because they didn't want to take on Harrison Barnes. Like I can't remember if they've ever paid the tax, but they certainly don't do it frequently. We just called Phoenix like the team that should have made the Derek Queen trade with New Orleans. Chicago should have just drafted Derek Queen. Like you could have talked me into something if you had Giddey and Queen as these 2 great passers at point guard and at center, and like with Buzelis being really athletic and cutting all over the floor, like you wouldn't have gotten any stops, but I would have been interested in your offense at least. Like, yeah, I really don't know what their vision here is at all. Remember when they started 4-0 or something like that. And there was the big ESPN story where it's like they think in Josh Giddey they've gotten their Tyrese Halliburton, and now they're looking for their Pascal Siakam. It's like, oh guys, you don't even have your Aaron Nesmith.
Oh god. I mean, we were in defense of that. We both felt like the Bulls were going to make the play in after that start. I thought like
It's
they had
not
something.
saying much though.
Yeah, but that's what they wanted.
And we didn't envision what was going to happen to the Bucks, although I guess we didn't envision what was going to happen to the Hornets either. So
I just think the most damaging thing about the Bulls is like, even for the teams that we're going to talk about next, at least they're kind of striving towards something. The issues that whatever they've done some very damaging things in the process that really set them back. The Bulls don't really do those types of moves, but they're just like a flat line. It's just been like the most neutral. Like you think about where they were from when this front office took over 6 years ago and where they are now. Now it's like exact same position that they were. Like no better, no worse.
yeah, I mean, they might get a really high pick in the 2027 draft. I think they just won they had lost like 10 in a row before that Bucks game where they went on the 27-0 run to beat Milwaukee. Like they might be one of the worst teams next year, especially because the East is going to look a lot better. But I don't know how much of a reward there's going to be for that between the bad draft class and the tanking reform that comes. It'd be kind of funny if right as the Bulls decided to tank, the NBA killed tanking. Like they can't even catch that break. But yeah, it's pretty bleak here. I Buzelis is the only player on their team. I guess Jalen Smith for like second round picks. Buzelis is the only player on their team I would trade a first round pick for. Do you agree with that?
You would trade him, or like he's the only
No,
guy
I'm
that you
saying
think has first round value?
has first round value. If I were running another team, Buzelis
Oh,
is the
okay.
only player they have that I would give up a first round pick to get.
Yeah.
That's bleak. And ironically, the next team we're going to talk about, the Pelicans, have several players that could command first round pick value. I'll start by giving credit where it is due. Troy Weaver is good at identifying talent. Clearly, he drafted the entire core in Detroit. Derek Queen and Jeremiah Fears, for all of the foibles with how they ended up with those guys, are like good picks. Like they look like lottery level talents. Fine, I'm on board with that. You can find good players. That is something. Sadiq Bey as well. I don't agree with how they got him, but he has played well for them. You called the Bulls your like least predictable team. I have no idea whatsoever what the Pelicans are doing. This makes no sense to me at all. I have no idea what their vision here is. Let's go through the trades last offseason. The Derek Queen trade kind of speaks for itself. You're telling me you couldn't have put a top 4 protection on that pick? You're telling me Atlanta was so dedicated to picking at number 13 that you couldn't have done something where like the pick was top 4 protected, and if they had kept it, it would have become an unprotected pick in 27. Like they could have done something. That was such a poorly thought out transaction. And by the way, why did they have to give up the number 23 overall pick to make that trade happen? I don't understand that at all. Speaking of the number 23 overall pick, they trade Indiana's top 4 protected pick to get number 23 overall. I don't know if that's as impactful a trade as the Derek Queen trade will be. I think I would argue it made less sense because there was no reward to timing the trade when they did. They made that trade during the NBA Finals while Tyrese Halliburton had injured calf. I don't know if Indiana was thinking about the risk of Tyrese Halliburton tearing an Achilles, but there was clear risk for Indiana that they hedged with that trade. The Pelicans had no reward. That trade was not going to be off the table after the finals, right? Like knowing how the finals went, the Pacers would 100% have made that trade afterward. And even if the Pacers had won the championship, I bet they still would have made that trade because it was about shedding salary for the 25-26 season when they thought they were re-signing Miles Turner. It wasn't necessarily about the injury risk to Halliburton. It was much more about we need to save some money. That's why they're making that trade during the finals. They just happened to hit on the one scenario where their pick became significantly more valuable. So I think that trade made even less sense than the Derek Queen trade. The Jordan Poole, CJ McCollum, Sadiq Bey trade. Look, Sadiq Bey has been good for them. Fine. But Sadiq Bey is only under contract through next season, when Jordan Poole is also under contract at $34 million of dead money. So functionally, you are basically paying Sadiq Bey $40 million to be on your team next year. And then by the time his contract expires and your team is maybe a little bit better because you've actually built something, you now have to pay him market value. And the value of getting him on that cheap contract is basically gone. That made no sense to me. Why did they bring Willie Green back as the coach? The whole world knew the team had quit on him. Why did he get 10 games? Why can't you give James Borrego a whole offseason and training camp to get his system in place? Maybe they wouldn't have been as embarrassing as they were earlier in the season if they could have just let James Borrego have the job from the start.
Yeah, supposedly that was like ownership driven.
Okay, ownership counts here.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, there was that DeJounte Murray stuff from the offseason, that those quotes that he gave where he was like, hey, I couldn't get time with trainers. I couldn't get time on the court. Like, there is something rotten at the core of this organization that I don't fully understand and I would be very, very concerned about. And frankly, like, no other team would have hired Joe Dumars, right? Like, no other team was thinking it's time for his front office comeback. Case in point, he hadn't been a GM for a decade. The only team that was ever rumored to be interested in Joe Dumars was the Pelicans. Then they hired David Griffin in 2019, and we thought, like, oh, this is over. Fine. Like, they've moved on. And then they come back to Dumars. Like, I get that he won a championship, but that was 20 years ago. His next decade with Detroit was totally inexplicable. They were very poorly managed after winning that title. And even during that title run, when they draft Darko Milicic over Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, and Chris Bosh, like, I don't know what compelled the Joe Dumars hire. It has not worked thus far. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. I am at a loss here.
The Pelicans were more predictable for me because I knew they were going to do something kind of crazy.
They were like predictably unpredictable to you then?
No, like you and I both saw from a mile away they're going to do something kind of dumb, but I'm probably underselling it. Like I didn't see them doing moves this damaging, like in such quick succession. Trading their lottery pick for this upcoming year. Like, okay, now you gave up a chance to draft a generational player. You mentioned the Jordan Poole trade. Like that trade doesn't seem that terrible. But all you did is you went from CJ McCollum to like another flavor of CJ McCollum. But
it was worse, by the way. Jordan Poole is not like a playable NBA player anymore, or at least if you're trying to win anything. CJ McCollum is at least still pretty good.
Like there's the same type of player, like at best, and now, but he has another year left on his contract. Now you're like up against attack this upcoming off season. You have no flexibility to improve this roster. So the only thing that I guess kind of give him credit for is that I kind of thought they might just reshuffle the entire core. Like thankfully they have not traded Trey Murphy or Herb Jones. Those guys still have a lot of value. They haven't messed those up. Yeah, we'll see what they get if they do eventually trade those guys. Like the Zion situation, I don't know if there's something about them, the new front office, that is maybe like changing him a little bit, having him be more consistent on the court. Maybe it's just maturity finally kicking in a little bit. I don't know how to credit them for that, but yeah, it just like for them to do those moves so quickly, like I just don't trust them to make like any transaction really, like as far as trusting what to do with their core. Like they'll find, now look, eventually they'll find good players. They'll find, like, you're right, Troy Weaver's a good evaluator. It's putting the pieces together that is the big issue.
You know what the Zion Derek Queen situation reminds me of a little bit is when the Knicks drafted Obi Toppin, clearly expecting to go on a multi-year tank, and they were going to presumably let Julius Randle go. And then Julius Randle became an all-star, and it's like, I guess we're stuck with two of the same guy, and they can't really play together. There's a little bit of that with Zion and Derek Queen, where like, it's great that Zion looks a lot better and healthier this year. I don't know how he fits with Derek Queen. I don't think you'll ever get a stop if you play those guys together. And I think their offensive ceiling together is pretty limited because neither of them is really a shooter. So like, okay, it's cool to have these two really interesting front court ball handler guys. I don't know if they really amplify each other at all. So I guess having Zion back and playing at a high level and staying healthier is nice, but you kind of bet your organizational direction on the idea that Queen was going to be your version of that. So I don't know how you're really going to address this kind of like poorly fitting partnership. As far as not trading Murphy and Jones or whatever go, like, I kind of think what's going to happen is they're just going to be an underwhelming team for a few years. and the surplus value of those contracts is going to wear out. It's going to be a little bit like Toronto, who we just talked about 40, 50 minutes ago, however long ago it was, where they waited too long to trade Siakam and Anunoby, and then they got less for those guys than they should have. What happens in 2 years if they haven't traded Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and they've gone nowhere? And it's like, well, now you're trading those guys for 1 or 2 picks instead of three or 4 picks. Why didn't they keep Jose Alvarado? What about Jose Alvarado made them say, we don't want this guy as part of our long-term core? Like, that made no sense to me. Jose Alvarado was one of the best players on their team.
I think I kind of get the feeling he was going to leave them and opt out because
they were so badly run. Like, that's on them.
I actually looked really more deeply into it. Like, the second round picks the Pelicans got are garbage from the Knicks. So it's like, well, why do you accept that deal then? So Jose Alvarado's got that player option. You and I suspect maybe Jose's got maybe there's gonna be a winkery involved where he picks it up and then extends with the Knicks. So like if that dynamic's in play, then Jose could have just opted out and recouped his money with the Knicks next year with the tax mid-level. So I wonder if maybe he made it. For them to trade him for as little as they did, kind of tells me maybe he informed them that he wasn't going to come back. Yeah.
I'm just like, it seemed like they had undervalued him organizationally for a few years now. And
I for sure
disagreed with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, aside from the fact that Troy Weaver is good at identifying good players, there's kind of nothing to grab onto here. I have no faith whatsoever in the people making decisions here to construct a winning basketball team.
All right. And then last but not least, the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, at least the Pelicans can identify talent. The Kings don't even really have that. I mean, what's the thing that they do well? Like, what is the thing the Sacramento Kings do best in your eyes?
It's hard to tell because there hasn't really been consistency in the front office. Like, I could point to a couple things about the previous front office that they did pretty well, like identifying talented guards. This one, I don't know. The only sample size we have is one off season in 2017 where they did some interesting signings and some interesting draft picks. It's still early to tell. Maybe Scott Perry's decent at drafting. We'll see how the Nick Clifford pick pans out.
I mean, yeah, like Dylan Cardwell is fine. Like Maxime Reynaud is fine. Nick Clifford is fine. Like whatever. Nobody there really jumps off the page to me. So I will see how those younger guys work out. They've had the same owner for most of the last 2 decades, and they've been in the lottery 19 out of the last 20 years. I don't know what else we really need to say. They have hired 3 of the 5 starters from the 2002 Kings into very prominent roles in the organization. None of them have worked out at all. I wonder what Chris Webber's up to. Maybe he can save them. There was this idea that they were stealth tanking this year. And no, you don't understand. They actually they meant to be this bad. I find that very hard to believe when you give Dennis Schroeder a 3-year deal on the mid-level when I don't think there was really that market for him anywhere else. And then they have to dump Keon Ellis to get off of the Dennis Schroeder contract. We have explained the Keon Ellis situation in depth so many times on this show. I hope this will be the last time, but basically what happened was they had a team option for Keon Ellis last offseason worth the minimum. They picked it up, and they did that because they wanted to keep his cap figure low so they could sign Dennis Schroeder and stable a luxury tax. The other alternative option for them would have been to decline that team option, which would have made him a restricted free agent. When a player is a restricted free agent, the fear of their incumbent team matching the contract tends to scare away other suitors, and you get guys under favorable long-term terms, right? The Thunder do this all the time. They did it with Lou Dort, did it with Aaron Wiggins, did it with Isaiah Joe, did it with Big Jalen Williams. It's pretty standard practice for smart teams. Kings didn't do it. They just said, you know what? We're going to keep Keon Ellis for super cheap this year, and then we'll let him be unrestricted next year. And what that basically meant was they were going to lose Keon Ellis because Keon Ellis was very desirable. The one player on that team, smart teams seemed to want. And then when it became clear they weren't going to be able to keep him, they used him to dump the Dennis Schroeder contract that they just signed. What more do I really have to say?
Yeah, I think my only issue with that is that they just kind of like with the Pelicans and Jose Alvarado, they just really underutilized him, undervalued him this year. He's been awesome with the Cavs so far, been a major part of their recent upward trajectory in February. Um, so I I think they did try. You were alluding to that they were trying to be good, and they just like were ended up being really terrible, right? Because that's what the Schroeder signing has to be about.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what makes it more sad is that they have been trying to compete all these years, try to make the play in. Like everything about the Kings in the past decade plus is they've never wanted to be bad. Like any season where they were heading towards the lottery, it's very brief. Obviously with any ownership, you can never prove. You can't say, hey, here's the evidence that this ownership is meddling in X, Y, and Z. But when
A lot of reporting.
when the same person has been there for so long, you have that same common denominator, you can start to see patterns in which how things are being impacted by ownership. So yeah, just they just in every way, like negotiating contracts, identifying players, like wanting Zach LaVine as part of the De'Aaron Fox return, giving Sabonis this near max extension, giving DeMar DeRozan not only paying him way more than everyone else, like probably more than double what the rest of the market had available for him at the time of his free agency, but giving up a valuable pick swap to bring him in.
That they couldn't get back in the De'Aaron Fox trade, by the way. They gave up a pick so valuable they couldn't get it back when they traded the Spurs and All-Star.
Like I remember in 2023, right after they had their great season, made the playoffs, and as soon as they give Sabonis that contract, I just knew, okay, this is going to flame out really fast because how are you going to also keep De'Aaron Fox? He's going to be wanting a max contract. Like you're really going to dedicate $50 million to Sabonis and Fox. Like that, what really crippled them is having such a high payroll for not even having a guy who's like consistently like a top 30 guys. Like these guys like will kind of like at a really, really good year, they might break into the top 30, but like but oftentimes they're not also at that level. Depends on the season.
They could have done a better job of putting a winning team around Fox and Sabonis, right? Like they almost got Alex Caruso. I think they were going to trade the pick that became Devin Carter for him. And then the Thunder swooped in with the Josh Giddey deal, and that didn't happen. It just made no sense to get DeMar DeRozan. He was exactly the kind of player they didn't need. They didn't need more shot creation. They needed defense. They needed 3-and-D. Would they have ever been a championship contender with that core? No. But if they had gotten a bunch of 3-and-D wings and put them around Fox and Sabonis, like, could they have been a persistent 45 to 50 win team? Yeah, I think so. But they really mismanaged everything around that. Everybody who's left Sacramento is thriving from that team, right? Like Mike Brown is with the Knicks right now, and I think they're both pretty happy with where they are. Fox and Barnes are in San Antonio, and like they might win the championship this season. It's like everybody leaves. Keon Ellis in Cleveland is in a great situation where he might get to the finals this year. Everybody they give up tends to be better off for it. DeAndre Hunter, we haven't even mentioned, like DeAndre Hunter was a bad contract. Like I don't know how much of a market there really was for him.
No, none. For that to be how you want to exit Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder just puzzles me. Yeah, I don't really have much else on them.
We are in maybe the biggest tank off in NBA history, and the worst team in the league is a team that was trying to be good. Like when you're trying to be good and you're still worse than a third of the league that's actively trying to be bad, that kind of says it all about where you are.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, I guess that's it. That kind of wraps up these rankings. Yeah. Anything you want to plug? Any closing notes on this?
No, I'm glad that we went in depth and we really gave each team the time it deserved. I think this is really fun and important exercise. So I'm glad that we did it. I have fun writing it. I have fun talking about it with you.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and we've got some more stuff planned. We're probably going to do best and worst contracts. We'll probably separate those. Still going to work on the formats. So be on the lookout for those. Yeah, just read CBS Sports. Sam's always got some good stuff coming up. Please subscribe to Third Apron if you haven't already, wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to the Substack. I've got a lot of good stuff. I'm going to be going over upcoming player contract situations, free agency extensions, all that good stuff. Really get into how much player could get in the next year or so. And yeah, be on the lookout. We'll try to do some more episodes in the next week. All right, bye everyone.